Hi, welcome back to our annual Dialogue with the Thinkers at Boao in Hainan. I'm the host, Yang Rui. Digital Asia rises fast and starts to impact the world economy as some major member states are anxious to talk about digital economy at the WTO. Big data, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and global supply chains will sustain China's innovation and growth. The fourth industrialization based on digital technology is gaining momentum. Today, I'm very happy to be joined here on the panel by Mr. Devika Gupta, Vice President for Private Sector and Co-Financing Operations of the Asian Development Bank, Vincent Lo Hongsui, Chairman of Xi'an Group, Ho Yi Kor, Chief Economist of the ASEAN Plus 3 Microeconomic Research Office, Dame Jenny Shipley, former Prime Minister of New Zealand, and Mr. Carlos M. Guterres, Chairman of Albright Stonebridge Group and former U.S. Secretary of Commerce. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Asia, a vibrant economy, is undergoing dynamic transformation. Digital technology is bringing new vitality and innovation to the region and beyond. Today, we, China Global Television Network, officially launched the Digital Asia Report at the Boao Forum for Asia. What does Digital Asia mean for us? Let's look at this.
Digital Asia. I'm an Asian industrial robot. This is my whole industry chain. You can see me almost everywhere in Asia. Asian industrial robots accounted for 65% of robot usage globally in 2017, and Asian manufacturers supply a high proportion of robots to the world. My prosperity comes with the development of the digital economy, which has promoted productivity and innovation in the manufacturing industry. The digital economy has boosted the Asian economy for the past 20 years and contributes almost 1/3 of Asia's annual economic growth. How did the whole industry chain of the digital economy become the engine of Asia's economic growth? Because Asia is the world's largest continent with huge markets and domestic demand from over 4 billion people. We are active in various industries, including automobiles, electronics, metalwork, plastics, and more. Asia's growth momentum has benefited the world. The contribution of Asia's GDP to global GDP rose from 14% in 1960 to 35% in 2018. Asia also has a high year-on-year growth rate, 8 percentage points above the world's average in 2010. The proportion of Asia's trade volume to the global volume rose from 1/4 in 2001 to over 1/3 in 2016. Asia is in the forefront of digitization. But what are the concerns over the potential for mass unemployment brought by the rise of the digital economy? Can the digital revolution bring new growth patterns to the world? What does the future hold for Asia? We will wait and see.
Welcome to our dialogue here. Ladies and gentlemen, as our video pointed out, there are concerns over mass unemployment and a widening gap among countries brought by the rise of a digital economy. How valid are those concerns, and how would you respond to these fears and concerns? We start from Madame Shipley.
Goodness. Look, I think we can be anxious, but I think we can also be hopeful. And I want to move to the hopeful step immediately because I think it's a key. The digital economy is going to, for example, allow inclusive finance that will connect people to the real economy in a way that the traditional economy has not. There have been many, many people who've never been able to open a bank account. But today, what you earn rather than what you own will determine whether you can borrow money and participate in the real economy. So I, for one, I'm watching not only Alibaba with Alipay, but the banks here in China are very advanced, far further advanced than the West, in allowing people who, if you can demonstrate you've got a pattern of earnings or behavior, and the data is there to record that, then decisions can be made rapidly and in a way that supports your next decision. So the next step of microfinance, enabling this through data, I think is a key to inclusion and the reduction of inequity. And I think that while employment is a complex side effect, I think this may well offset it to some extent.
Mr. Guterres?
You know, I agree with Prime Minister Shipley. There are important benefits. But I think we also need to be talking about the negatives, the downsides. These technologies are beginning to come to life, but they haven't hit at scale yet. When they do, there will be a lot of displaced workers. And I think we should focus on the workers, not the jobs, because the jobs will change. The industries will change. We can't cling to industries of the past.
We need to focus on the issue of unemployment, the relationship between the use of digital technology and the creation of jobs, or in Guterres' words, we need to look at the workers instead of smartphones and digital technology. But Vincent, you come from Hong Kong, a vibrant economy. What do you think of the prospects of unemployment? We have the hopefuls and the negatives. Would you end up making a compromise?
In Hong Kong, we have actually over full employment at this stage, because Hong Kong is evolving itself into a commercial hub for China. In the past 40 years, it's bringing money into China. But in the future, it's bringing money out of China. And I think Hong Kong really has a full agenda. But we just need to also upgrade our own economy. Right? It's no longer just doing simple finance or real estate. We now have to be playing more of an integrator role. We have a chief economist who represents the ASEAN Plus 3 macroeconomic research. Now, the population in India, China, and ASEAN combined account for almost 50% of the world's total of 7 billion. That's a lot in terms of big data, a market for the big data. So what do you think of the prospects for the job market when we have this rapid development and evolving concept of the digital economy?
Actually, our focus is more on East Asia, but I think East Asia is very enthusiastic about the new technology, and they have been embracing the new technology much more than other parts of the world. As you mentioned, there's a risk involved because the technology is disruptive, right? It basically changes the way business model works, the way you conduct business. I mean, the obvious one is in the factory where automation, robotics is taking over, and it's reducing employment. So, I think a lot of the countries in the region, particularly those which are focused on manufacturing sector, they are very concerned about this. And I think almost all the countries in the region have come up with plans to how to move and take advantage of the new industrial revolution. So in Thailand, for instance, you have Industry 4.0, right? Malaysia also has its own plan. And in the case of the Philippines, which is a service economy, they are also worried about the new technology, affecting the BPO industry. Because a lot of the BPO is call center, and over time we know that you're going to have robots taking over a lot of that function. So they are trying to move towards KPO, knowledge process outsourcing. So, and my sense is that the new services that's created by technology is going to be much greater than the disruption or the reduction in employment. So I'm actually very optimistic that if we can sort of manage the risk in terms of the unemployment, the retrenchment, the new technology on balance is going to be very positive for the region.
Mr. Gupta, what would be the focus of your diligence report when you look for opportunities, investment in infrastructure? For example, we are talking about unemployment, the possible relationship between big data, digital technology, and the huge, huge population in Asia. How do you define digital Asia in this context?
To the point that Mr. Guterres made, we have to talk about reskilling because jobs will change. And to some extent that itself is a black box, because we don't know what's the pace of technological change and what we should be retraining people for. But I think the good thing is, as they say, you can order a pizza on the internet, you can't have it delivered on the internet.
Follow-up question,
So,
Mr. Gupta, is jobs will change. Will jobs be lost? Will people be made redundant?
Personally, if I look back, I'm very hopeful that won't be the case. What will those jobs look like? We will need to, sort of crystal ball gaze and prepare populations for it. But one thing that definitely will happen is the hollowing out of the middle. So automation will take up all the normally easy to do jobs in the middle. You will either have the hard to automate jobs at the lower end, or the hard to automate jobs at the higher end, which means profits of companies will flow into balance sheets and into shareholders rather than being paid out as wages. So I think one very big thing that governments will have to do is to find redistributive mechanisms by which these profits are then channelized for the public good to those people who have been affected by the hollowed out middle.
Vitality and the competitive edge of SMEs, non-private, private economy in China mean a lot for the creation of jobs. Premier Li Keqiang said in his government work report at the opening ceremony of the annual NPC session, Mr. Vincent Lo, among the 6 factors of stabilization, or the other way around, job creation is listed as the most important by President Xi Jinping. What does the economic slowdown in China mean for this powerhouse that used to contribute up to 30% to the world economy, the Chinese economy?
The slowdown, I think it means that young people looking for jobs will be more difficult. And every year there's 9 million graduates that come into the job market. And in China, the one-child policy, if you have a son or daughter and not be able to find jobs, I think the parents or the grandparents will all be very upset, and I think that will create a lot of social problems. So that is why I think the Prime Minister has made job security, that's the key to China's own stability at this point in time.
Mr. Ego, one hallmark of globalization is about the free flow of human resources about across the border of a traditional nation states. But due to the man-made barriers of protectionism in the age of deglobalization, what do you think of the outflow of human resources from Silicon Valley? Will ASEAN and other 3 member economies in the framework of 10+3 benefit enormously as a result?
Yes, I believe so. I think talent is very mobile, especially, so if they feel that they are not welcome in one particular place, they can move to another. And I think Silicon Valley is a great asset for the U.S. because it's able to attract some of the best talent. And if they were to put in measures that discourage people from coming, I think it's a loss to the U.S. rather than to the rest of the world. And so we have a lot of Asian students who are there who would think of coming back to the region. And I think another reason why that would happen is because Asia is the fastest growing region, right? If you look 10 years, 20, 15 years ahead, it's going to be the biggest economic bloc in the world. And so there will be a lot of jobs and opportunities created in the region. And I think this will be a magnet for people to come back to Asia as well. So when you talk about job losses, actually I think we are just looking at one segment of the economy, which is the manufacturing sector. That sector will obviously be, more and more automated. There'll be less and less job created in that particular area. But also don't forget that manufacturing has been fragmented. So a lot of the old manufacturing jobs has become services now. If you want to say in the manufacturing, the game is you need to move up skill, right? You need to move up that. But there's a lot of demand for IT. Everywhere in Asia that I go, there's a shortage of skills. So I fully agree with your, idea that we need to have a program to upskill the labor force and to retrain them.
Mr. Guterres. Yes, Vincent, go ahead.
Can I add one point here? I think with what's happening now, particularly with the U.S., I think we in Asia will need to work closer together because if, let's say, the Chinese from Silicon Valley is returning, their obvious choice would be going back to China because the market is there. But if we can work better with other countries like New Zealand, but because the New Zealand market is too small, so they might not be attracted. So I think the regional economy will need to be further enhanced so that people can work together and benefit together.
Further regional integration is, of course, an important issue on the agenda for leaders in Asia. Let's look at what happens recently in southern China with the completion of a big bridge that connects Hong Kong, Macau, and 9 cities in mainland China. We call the whole area Greater Bay Area. Will digital technology help connect the 3 parts further, Vincent?
Most definitely. I think the Greater Bay Area, I think it's a very brilliant concept of making this region closer. I think with closer collaboration and integration, I think this economy will be able to really move forward and hopefully set the stage for further growth for everybody else.
I wonder if this gentleman from Asia Development Bank agrees with Vincent about regional integration through the use of digital technology.
ADB contributes in a very significant manner to the ASEAN centrality of a strong ASEAN, and there are several sub-initiatives under the ASEAN plus 3, under the Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand corridor, etc., etc. The idea is really to have a more integrated ASEAN region. As it is, I think intra-ASEAN trade is 25% of their total trade. So that's a very, very well-integrated region, and I think that's the way to go. That's the way to grow. And ADB is contributing both in terms of this integration and in terms of promoting incubators and business development initiatives which are at the forefront of digital technology, among other things. But just to make one more point on the jobs, that was the last thing, we are underestimating the amount of jobs that education, health, especially elderly care is going to create over the next decade. We somehow seem to equate jobs with manufacturing or regular services. That's not the case. Today, the world is suffering from lifestyle diseases, cholesterol, blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, and we have to move from medicine to preserving health. And that's a very large sector, and I think that's where governments have to come in and create opportunities, create networks. That will be a very big opportunity.
Yes, indeed, education helps. Prime Minister, how will digital technology impact government policies?
One of the frightening things about public policy is that it rarely is ahead of innovation. And I think this is a huge challenge, to be honest, because the ability to create enormous capability, and we're on the edge of 5G, which will be the Internet of Things and take us into another sphere, public policy is trying to catch up. I don't know how you can solve this, by the way, but I think that we need to stick to evidence-based work as we consider whether it's a Huawei or a Ericsson or a Nokia type offering. Get past the anxiety of suspicion and into the evidence so that governments can confidently evaluate innovation that's coming into the market so they can make decisions. Because even in a developed economy like New Zealand, which is well connected, innovation is going faster than the public sector. It's the truth of the matter. It's not a criticism. It's just a reality. I think collaboration across the region around how we will adopt and facilitate innovative platforms and then the use of those platforms to get to the future we're speaking about, it's ripe for the RCEP, the new RCEP, I beg your pardon, type organization. And we would have thought historically RCEP was a trade-related relationship. But those relationships need to move to trade and services type relationship, where we think about how can we collaborate across platforms to enable the region in the way that you're describing. And in my opinion, it's essential for financing as well, because if you look at the development of this region we're talking about, it's mainly public sector money that's funding infrastructure, for example. It doesn't appear to me, and I'm generalizing here, but I think it's an important point. At the moment, we don't appear to see the private sector with great confidence sharing the huge investments that are required in order to get the development that we're speaking about. And I think a highly innovative collaboration across this region in digital terms would then bring private sector finances and financiers in with more confidence, because more transparent, data's more available. If there are layers of collaboration of funding, I think we'll get further more quickly. And this is not to criticize the ADB or anyone else, but it is a tipping point when you know that development's going to be rampant, when the private sector follows and comes in as a willing partner on multiple levels to fund the infrastructure we're discussing.
Mr. Guterres, in the Rust Belt, you have the white deplorables, and do you think digital economy, digital technology will be more of an opportunity for those who are die-hard supporters of President Donald Trump? And what does that mean for the flow of labor force between the United States and China across the Pacific?
Rust Belt will be impacted tremendously. And that is President Trump's base, as you said. There's no question that manufacturing, basic manufacturing, will be done through robotics, through AI. But we're also looking at a phenomenon where there's also white-collar job displacements. Lawyers reviewing contracts, accountants doing the books. So this is a trend that's going to impact the top and the bottom. And it's not just manufacturing workers. They will be displaced unless we retrain. If I can just say one thing, because I totally agree about the government and the private sector. We talk about R&D, and for companies, R&D. There is R, which is research. That is long-term. Companies don't have the financial patience or the competitive patience. The government needs to play a role in basic research. Development is what companies do. So they take the research of the government and they bring it to life. They bring the magic. They bring the iPhone. They bring all these incredible products. But the two have to work together. And we can't just assume that it's the government or assume that it's Silicon Valley.
Mr. Gupta, with the rise in labor costs, commodity prices, we see ongoing relocation of R&D centers of overseas multinationals from mainland China to low-income economies on our periphery in Asia at large. What does that mean for the future of the vibrant Asian economy?
Asia is abundant both in terms of headcount.
I raised this issue in the context of actually more investment from SoftBank, Alibaba, Tencent, these giants in the emerging markets and poor economies. We are talking about digital economy in Asia.
So I think there is adequate talent, and of course different countries are at different level of evolution, which is an opportunity. So the good thing about economic activity is that it does not like an arbitrage. If there is a gap, it will automatically flow to where it is. So I mean, that's how China was the manufacturing hub of the world. And now I think China is already seeing some of that going away to other Asian countries which are competitive just because China has evolved. And I think that will continue, and that will really not be meaningful if we are an integrated region. Because that's when the flow will be abetted, it will be encouraged, and that's when the benefits will again flow to the entire community. So I think that is what will happen, that is what has been happening, and it's not something that we need to be fearful about at all. The governments will, just as you have a public-private partnership, there are straight-jacketed roles which the private sector and the public sector have to play. And I think regulation is a very large part in which governments have to work together, because along with digital technology, it's like cooking gas. Coal was not risky. With gas, you can have an explosion. That doesn't mean that gas is risky and we won't use it. It's just that we need a structure around containing those risks. So things like identity theft, intellectual property theft, etc., etc. Those are things, base erosion and profit sharing, avoidance of taxation, because on the online system you can actually avoid value-added taxes. You can actually flow millions and billions of dollars across borders, affecting the economies that are those currencies. So I think regulation will have to take care of these aspects, and there again collaboration amongst the governments is the key. Without that, we don't get anywhere.
Mr. Kaur, do you think digital technology would help create the digital gap, or the other way around, it will help close the gap between poor and the rich?
I think the government has a job to do to try to close the gap. The gap will emerge, obviously. But one of the features of the new technology is that it's becoming easier and easier to use, right? So, Alibaba, Tencent, and all that, they come up with these fantastic apps that are really quite intuitive, right? So, in a way, the technology company are making a tremendous effort to make it very easy to use. So, as a result, I think the gap that we traditionally think about IT, very advanced, technical, has been breached by the technology company themselves. Right? But there's still a role, I think, for the government to try to bring technology to the poor people, right? And this has been done through the iPhone, for instance. Now the iPhones are very cheap and almost everybody can afford it. You have all kinds of apps on the phone that they can use in a very intuitive way. So maybe the gap will not be as large as we think. But certainly, I mean, people who are working in traditional sectors of the economy will have to be brought up, into the new services economy. And that's a role there I think the government can play in terms of reskilling, upskilling, and also improving that.
We've been talking about the importance of different players, such as non-public investment and also government policy support. Prime Minister, let's look at 5G, a most controversial flashpoint in the world. New Zealand is one of the one member of the Five Eye Alliance, and has made it very clear for a while that you would bar Huawei from being part of your market.
No, that's not correct.
No, that's not correct. Correct my mistake if I've got the misinformation. But how do you look at the importance of 5G in changing the digital landscape in Asia?
Look, 5G, and I'm no expert on this, but I've looked at it enough and have been involved in enough industries where the enabling capability of it is going to be transformational. It will connect our world in a way that's going to change forever. We need to get this. There's two questions. I don't want to get distracted on Huawei and New Zealand, but just to make the point, I think if we can stick to the evidence, so if we need to explore whether these things are fair or not, or transparent or not, we should have a process where each country is not forced into making an arbitrary decision, but rather is enabled through information and insight to say, well, I'll have this or that. I personally also support competitive processes, so you know the attributes and whatever you're buying. I do think governments have a role to roll this capacity out, because 5G certainly will enable cities. It's perhaps not as useful in remote areas, but it is inevitably going to enable those people who are closely congregated. And I agree with the point just made. I do believe that 5G is going to create enough capacity that people who have been very marginalized in the economy, that this is a gap that's going to close. The powerful, in the controlling of their assets, human capital, and the ability to be able to demonstrate your talent and someone who's a digital provider to then analyze that and reward you without showing that you've got land or property or this or that is transformational. And in my opinion, we are right on the threshold of some really interesting closing the gap type potential. However, we've got to get over the how do you roll it out over Southeast Asia so that Indonesia and everyone else has the same opportunity that China did. One of the great decisions China made was to enable the telecommunications network early so that people were connected to markets and markets to people. And if you send that privilege across the other areas of undeveloped Asia and allow them to be connected, people, I'm talking about ordinary people connected to markets and markets to people, because that's what technology does. They're not just the market at the corner, they're in the market of the world. And so enabling the scope of the infrastructure so people can participate. Governments have got to do the big piece, and then I think the private sector and human capital will just unleash itself across the platforms if we can get there.
Mr. Guterres, so as I'm concerned, President Donald Trump is worried about several things. First of all, the new world order in the 21st century. Second, importance of 5G and other corresponding high technology that may help reshape the world and the world order. That has a lot to do whether the United States leadership will be sustained with the rise of protectionism and unilateralism, particularly disputes that are taking place between Europeans and Americans, between the United States and your two neighbors, Canada and Mexico. You can raise a number of examples to illustrate the conundrum and dilemma that President Trump faces at the moment when we look into the future. So what do you think of 5G? That is one of the major issues between the two countries, China and the United States, particularly with regard to the trade war.
I have a big problem with the way it's being managed, because there's a perception that 5G, all these new digital technologies are country versus country.
Yeah.
It's China versus the U.S., and if China gets it first, China will dominate the U.S. It is really about companies versus companies. And it's going to be Alibaba versus Amazon. And if Alibaba has access to 5G before Amazon, that is a commercial advantage for Alibaba, and that's the way business works. But this idea that it's government versus government, I think is unfounded. And at the end of this, it's going to be made, and it's going to be made possible by companies, whether they be private or public, but not governments against governments, unless we're getting into use of robotics for other things, but that's probably a separate conversation.
But undeniably, this is not very quiet competition in high-tech area between the United States and China is allegedly politically motivated, politically charged, and therefore you have good reasons to question the way things are managed. Since we live in the age of a global supply chains and value chains, we're going to have more value-added industries in the what we call fourth industrial revolution. So, Mr. Kaur, what should be done to level the playing field and to lay the groundwork for healthy development of a global supply chain? The understatement of my question is obviously referring to the alleged efforts by President Trump to decouple the Chinese economy. But given the sizable market of up to perhaps 700 to 800 million middle-class consumers in the Chinese market, is it an easy job to decouple the Chinese economy in the age of digital technology?
Yeah, I think that's the real challenge for the U.S., right? Because it's obvious that in the next 10, 15 years, the middle class in Asia is going to grow even bigger. They already have some, they're going to get richer, they're going to spend more, and so this is where the market is, right? And so despite all these protectionist movement against trade, I think Asia will continue to integrate. There's no escaping that. And there will be risk that comes along with it. And those risks have to be managed. And I think this will give an impetus to the Asian Economic Community project of the Master Plan for Connectivity. Because I think ASEAN countries on its own are a bit small. But when you integrate them together, there are 650 million population with a GDP which is about ranked number 6 in the world, about $2.5 trillion, and it's going to get bigger. So Asia will continue to regionalize, integrate, and this movement against protectionism, unfortunately, may split the world apart, which is unfortunate. So I think the best solution, and everybody recognizes this, is that they come to some compromise, reset the rules of the game, and so that we can move the multilateral trading system forward. Because I think this technology particularly is going to integrate the region, because one of the features about the new technology is connectivity, right? The more connectivity you have, the more benefits you get out of it, the more synergy you're going to have.
One major issue concerning the future of WTO, the World Trade Organization, is e-trade, e-commerce, and how to look at the status of China, the Chinese market, whether it is a market-oriented economy or not, and the free flow of information, so on and so forth. So major member economies of WTO are anxious to address the issue of how to reform the WTO. As a representative of Asian Development Bank, do you think this is a major concern?
Well, in all multilateral agreements, there are major concerns because there are individual players who seem to be affected more personally or immediately by a particular thing. I think the multilateral agencies have just to be good, honest brokers and evangelists to say that the larger good lies. See, for any cooperation that you do, you obviously give up some immediate benefit for the larger good. You increase the size of the pie and therefore you end up doing something better, or you say that yes, you are giving access, so you will get access and you will get a benefit somewhere. You have to give up a benefit somewhere else. I think that's the thought that needs to be propagated. At the end of the day, business is about perception. So I think we as ADB, multilateral organizations, responsible governments, heads of government, they all have to espouse the general thought that collaboration in the end cannot be harmful. Unfortunately, and I turn to, being from India, I turn to a little bit of Indian philosophy. Eventually, whatever we are discussing today as the problems emerging are created out of anxiety and insecurity. I think the best long-term bet to them is for the people who are being accused to prove that there is no anxiety. It's a level playing field, because until the perception is cleared, no matter how good your rational case, you are not likely to get success. Eventually, the march of integration and globalization is unstoppable. Nobody can stop it. But in the short term, perceptions, if there is a deficit in perception, that needs to be made up. And I think that's what we should be doing.
What President Xi Jinping said in France earlier might be very useful for us to reconsider how to reshape the Asian economy or digital economy in Asia. Prime Minister, when both sides, the US and China, are applying the finishing touches to hopefully ink an agreement to end the trade war, the structural issues, quote unquote, will be very important for both sides. And the one major structural issue is how the government should assist or should minimize its role in digitalization of the economy. So when we look at the reform of WTO, when we look at the role of the government in industrialization, what do you make of the Chinese version and at the same time the counter-argument from Washington?
Look, governments do have to set the framework within which people can be free and both human capital and financial capital flows responsibly. We're at a moment where our fear of not doing something for either nationalist reasons against the potential of, if we can get through this, and make progress. One is a very pessimistic and miserable outcome, and the other actually will unleash new growth and new opportunity. There are, though, some important things in these discussions, and without going into detail, you know, the US has wanted change from China, and China has indicated it would make some concessions, and vice versa. And I think that, you know, we need to look, even as India talks about how it will work with China, these are different economies, and we need to be able to openly discuss our anxieties and concerns. I think the geopolitical agenda, we have to be honest about it. And to come back to my colleague's observation, we should be hopeful, because the projections are, as have been referred, that by 2050, the world economy is going to be significantly larger. But the truth of the matter is, the US is going to have less of that more, and much of the region we're discussing today is going to have more of that more. The emerging 7 as opposed to the G7, there's a shift. Now, this is a huge opportunity rather than a geopolitical tragedy. And I think many people who have been poor and left behind, if they can be enabled through education, connected through infrastructure, and the technology overlay, I think we're looking at outstanding prospects for the developed and the developing economies.
Thank you so much for all of you, the insightful analysis and your contributions, particularly to the catalyst of innovation and integration in Digital Asia. Now I'd like to open the floor and take questions from the audience here. This is a session of Q&A. Please raise your hands, identify yourselves, and ask questions. Please pinpoint the guest speaker you want to direct the questions to, please. Questions from the audience.
My name is Sade Bimantara. I'm from Indonesia. I just would like to ask a general question. What collaboration and partnership can the government has with the private sector and academics to have a similar sort of place like Silicon Valley, but all over Asia and all over the world, like in China, in New Zealand, Australia, and Indonesia? Thank you.
Perhaps I'll try and tackle that issue. About 15 years ago, I tried to help Shanghai build a Silicon Valley there. It's now almost finished, but the size itself is simply too small. But what's more important is that it's not just the hard infrastructure, it's the ecosystem that you have to create, right? How do you break down the walls of the universities? How do you make sure that people who have ideas can interact and sparkle and find angel investors? And how do you help the startups so that they have a better chance of success? I think those are the key issues. The lady.
To Vincent Lo, I'm from the Business Daily of Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, we've been advocating industrialization and technology and innovation as a hub, especially that is the positioning of Hong Kong. So what kind of advantages do you think Hong Kong possesses to break the barriers of the size of its economy?
Hong Kong, we've never been strong in technology, but Hong Kong do have some advantage. It can be an important part of that whole ecosystem to work with the Greater Bay Area, particularly Shenzhen, to bring the technology to commercialize, to raise funds. And Hong Kong is very strong in marketing and promotion. So all these are key issues that Hong Kong can play a very positive role.
Thank you, everyone, for your meaningful participation in this discussion about Digital Asia and the future for knowledge-based economy, the worldwide. Thank you so much.